If anybody could sum up 22-year-old Drew in one word, they all agreed that it would be busy. She had something to do all the time. She was a senior studying graphic arts at the University of North Dakota in 2003. Drew, who was now a member of the Gamma Beta sorority, had been a homecoming queen and honor student. She had two part-time jobs, volunteered with children's organizations, taught kindergartners to read, and collected money for several charities as if her college coursework wasn't enough to keep her occupied. Drew never hesitated to lend a helping hand and sacrifice what little time she had to do so. According to her brother, a new student who knew no one at the school switched over when she was 14. She was initially approached by Drew, who took her under her wing and became her lifelong friend. She liked being active and had played basketball, golf, and volleyball since she was a small child. Despite her great athletic potential, everyone knew that her true calling was in the arts and creativity. Because she was always sketching, taking pictures, and making things, she even got the moniker Doodles when she was little. "I'd look and see a blank," her stepfather, Dee, said. She would perceive beauty, diversity, and depth. For her, it came naturally. Drew worked a shift at a Victoria's Secret shop at the Grand Forks, South Dakota Columbia Mall on November 22, 2003. After finishing at 4 p.m., she spent an hour shopping on her own. She contacted her boyfriend Chris, who was studying graphic design, and they had been dating for around 5 months. Having purchased a new pocketbook for her mother, Drew was eager to inform him that she was able to utilize a gift card in addition to receiving it at a reduced cost. As she ventured out into the cold to locate her vehicle, she continued to speak with Chris on the phone. As she arrived at her vehicle, Drew was pressed for time and had another duty in a few hours. Before the phone connection suddenly ended, Chris heard her utter something that sounded like, "All right, okay," followed by, "Oh my God." Maybe he barely heard half of a statement, or maybe the signal had faded. Knowing she had work shortly nonetheless, he continued his evening while moving boxes and held the phone to his ear with his shoulder. Chris received another call from Drew at 7:40 p.m., but when he answered, all he could hear were wind, static, and the pressing of digits. The call ended 20 seconds later. Chris contacted Meg, Drew's roommate, as panic swiftly grew. Drew had not returned home. Drew was meant to be working her second shift at a small bar called El Roco, but neither of them had shown up when Meg phoned. It was after 11 p.m. when Meg and Chris decided it was time to contact the police and report her missing after a few unanswered calls. Now it was completely dark, freezing, and beginning to snow. Officers arrived at the mall's car park, which was relatively empty with only a few employees parked there now. They saw her red car right away, and even though it was messy, they could see that the back seats had various items scattered around, including empty food wrappers, clothes bags, and changes of clothes. Instead of someone searching through her belongings, they saw the purse she had recently purchased for her mother, along with her wallet containing cash and credit cards, which they assumed would have been stolen if this had been a robbery. They also discovered a small black knife case on the ground, and they alerted Drew's father, Alan, who hurried into town after seeing her empty car. He described the car as a god-awful, terrible night crime scene, and conducted a little vigil next to it because he was so distraught and overtaken with emotion. After examining the knife sheath, experts concluded that it was a piece of a set that was often offered at Berard's shops, which sold everything from toys and food to furniture, tools, and appliances. But they had something to work with since it was a certain knife. Neither blood nor evidence of a fight were discovered in Drew's vehicle. Nothing was broken or crushed, and the locks didn't seem forced. Almost as soon as she arrived to her vehicle, it was probable that she had been kidnapped at knife point. They were aware that Drew had called Chris twice. The first time obviously at the mall, and the second time, a few hours later, was unknown. Chris was immediately questioned by authorities and cleared out as a suspect. Adam, her ex-boyfriend, whom she had dated for 3 years prior to Chris, was also excluded from the inquiry. After discovering one of Drew's shoes under a bridge some 25 miles from the mall, they were able to locate the source of the second call. It had originated in Minnesota, close to Cookton. They need more assistance from other authorities or other legislation, since it was evident that she had been transported over state boundaries. Soon after, law enforcement agencies and even the FBI were engaged in what was becoming a highly publicized case with a lot of media coverage. According to one investigator, Drew was everyone's daughter. Many people knew her well and wanted to assist because they could relate to her predicament. Residents of Grand Fork were so concerned that 1,300 individuals responded to the call when authorities asked for volunteers to assist. Drew was their inspiration. They wanted to support her. When it comes from the heart, that's just someone, the P County Sheriff stated. It burst in a matter of days, according to another investigator, and there were lots of TV trucks parked outside with their towers rising into the air. In comparison to the environment that any of us at the GFPD were undoubtedly used to, it was very chaotic. He was unable to handle all of the interview requests at one time because they were so many. According to him, on some of those days, I would arrive at the station at 5 in the morning to record something for one of the morning programs, and I may stay until 10 in the evening to record something for a live broadcast that night. Her face and informational flyers were all over the place. Hundreds held vigils for her, and emails were issued to all UND staff, professors, and students. Her phone was still pinging until about 8 p.m., and it had been located within 3 miles of a mobile tower close to the town of Pfizer. A few days later, busloads of volunteers were being driven from Grand Forks to Pfizer when the phone was either dead or dead. The buses were coming and going on the hour as so many people wanted to join in. Quite literally, every single stone was being overturned and checked twice. But even with the ATVs, dogs, huge search groups, and helicopters, there was nothing. The weather was a big issue. It was brutal, freezing cold with thick snow and ice covering the ground, making an already tiring and tough search even more tricky. But no one was deterred, and no one was giving up. Everybody ready. Let's find her today, let's go get through it. Had been easy to find Drew on the cameras inside the shop. She had been wearing a bright pink top and browsed for a while before buying the purse for her mother. She then put her long dark coat on as she made her way outside into the cold winter evening. This was a match to the time that she called Chris. The tapes were not great. They were not only dealing with not the best quality cameras, but the tapes would often be reused and taped over again and again. Police were also going through more than 2,000 leads, but within a matter of days, they had closed them all. It was definitely good to rule people out, but this meant there were no suspects. 4 days after Drew's disappearance, detectives finally received a tip that seemed odd. The caller immediately said that they seen a known sexual offender shopping in the Columbia Mall at precisely the same time. Alonzo Rodriguez Jr. was Drew. 9 identities were found when they ran a check of those who had previously been charged with kidnappings and sexual assaults in the region, but Alfonso was the only one who had been labeled a Category 3 sex offender. Only 6 months earlier, in 1974, he had been freed from jail after serving a 23-year term. In addition to attacking 2 young ladies, he was found guilty of aggravated rape and attempted aggravated rape. One of the women, Shirley, said she had offered to give him a ride home as she knew he was a fellow student from school. He held her against her will and sexually assaulted her. He then raped a second woman at knife point. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison for this attack, but the judge did not impose the full sentence for some reason, and instead, Alfonso was placed in the Minnesota Security Hospital for treatment. In 1980, he was allowed to leave the hospital, and he would strike again, attempting to kidnap and stab a third woman. She managed to run away and gave such a detailed description to the police that they picked him up almost instantly. This time, Alonzo was sentenced to 23 years in prison and had been released in May 2003. In fact, when Shirley heard about the abduction of Drew, she immediately thought of Alfonso. It had been 30 years since she was attacked, but her mind went right back there, and she couldn't stop thinking about where he might have been that night. She said within a day of hearing about it on television and looking on the internet, I called the numbers that were listed to tell them to make sure to check what Alfonso Rodriguez had been doing that evening. This was a huge lead, and authorities who were already going through CCTV footage from the mall now had someone to focus on, and a time to work with investigators were then able to locate Alfonso on the cameras in the mall as well. He had been walking around aimlessly by himself for about half an hour before Drew clocked off in a Target store. He was just going up and down the CD aisle and around in circles. He was definitely looking for something, but the police didn't think for a second. It was new music. He walked to the exits around 3:40 p.m. and sat down close to the doors. He was obviously unaffected by the chilly wind. He observed people coming and going, and 10 minutes later, at 3:50 p.m., he pulled on his gloves and got to his feet. In no time, he began to pursue a blonde outdoors. She shoved her shopping cart in the direction of her vehicle. As he walked away, he even stared into the camera. They believed they discovered Alfonso in Crookton working on a construction site because of the time of this and his strange conduct, even if the lady he followed was not Drew. There was a very specific blade in a jar of what seemed and smelled like cleaning fluid. And this was just a few kilometers from where Drew's sneaker had been discovered under the bridge. The knife they were searching for was connected to the sheath discovered next to Drew's tire, and one of the detectives said that you could have knocked him over with a feather when he saw it. As they dissected his car and his story experts discovered multiple bloodstains, Alfonso allowed them to take the knife, claiming he had nothing to do with Drew's fate and that he hadn't even seen her face before being permitted to return to the home he shared with his mother on the seat and rear window. Unfortunately, the discovery that this matched Drew's DNA was not shocking. Alonzo was taken into custody and accused of abduction on December 1st. Although they had their suspect, the fight was far from over. Alfonso remained silent and they still didn't know where Drew was, but it seemed like they would not be transporting Drew, the FBI, and other units over state borders home alive. A private investigator was recruited by Drew's family, but weeks turned into months, and before long it was spring 2004. The hunt for her had been hampered by the awful weather during the whole process, and certain areas covered in snow had taken a very long time to thaw. According to Grand Forks Police Department Sergeant Mike Headland, "I have 3 daughters, so I thought as a father, what would I want these investigators to do if I were there in their place? I would want them to be on every program that airs in the hopes that someone could see and decide to assist my daughter." There were other brief evenings when I slept a little, and when I eventually fell down, I would find myself staring at the ceiling and asking myself, what can we do differently? Nevertheless, on April 17, 2004, Drew Shin's family received the terrifying news that her remains had been discovered in a ravine just outside of Crook. She was naked from the waist down, with her hands bound behind her back, and a rope tied around her neck that contained the remains of a plastic bag that had been placed over her head. Because so much time had passed, they were unable to determine how exactly she died, but they did discover that she had been sexually assaulted, beaten, and stabbed, and that she had multiple deep cuts, including a 5.5-inch cut on her neck. The medical examiner concluded that she had died either from exposure to the elements or from a neck wound asphyxiation, which could have left her in the cold to perish. Although it was a day of relief, her father, Alan, described it as a very terrible day. It had been a devastating conclusion to a massive search, and we knew that Drew was no longer with us. When her burial eventually came, Drew's ex-boyfriend, Adam, assisted in carrying her coffin with Chris. The two had been helping one another out a lot, and were on the same search parties since Drew's case was beyond state boundaries and might be considered a federal case. Alfonso was charged with murder and might have been executed. This would be North Dakota's first capital case in a century. Following many mental health assessments, specialists determined that he was not only in a sound and sane state of mind when he murdered Drew, but also mentally competent to stand trial in August 2006. He entered a not guilty plea. He was unanimously found guilty of abduction with the intent to kill. After receiving a death sentence, Alfonso started his incarceration at an Indiana maximum security prison. As part of his one appeal, he proceeded to submit appeals all the way up to the Supreme Court in 2011. Alfonso confessed a portion of himself. He said he had mistaken Drew for a college girl who had sexually assaulted him at a religious camp when he was 6 years old. He told a psychotherapist that he felt a rush of emotions and physical responses right away. He relived the torture of his early years as he started to detach. He said that she sat in the driver's seat of her automobile, head turned, chatting on the phone. She glanced up at him as Alfonso walked up, and he was already experiencing a severe case of dissociative disorder. Although the state's attempt to murder her during a blackout and panic when he realized this appeal was also failed, Alfonso eventually acknowledged in 2013, while he was on death row, that he had killed Drew on purpose rather than by accident, as everyone already knew. In a 400-page paper, he acknowledged all of it. He claimed to have followed her out and to have unlocked the passenger side door while she was using her phone and inserting her key into the ignition. He assaulted her, covering her head with a sack as she began to bleed from her lips. After forcing her into his vehicle, he sexually raped her, chained her arms, and left her corpse in the snow. According to Drew's mother, the long paper didn't alter anything anyway, so she wasn't interested in finding out what more was in it. To everyone's surprise, in 2021, it became clear that he was acting for his own benefit rather than out of regret. Alfonso was spared the death penalty when his sentence was reversed. A court determined that the coroner's false testimony, the attorney's omission to mention the possibility of an insanity defense, and the evidence of severe post-traumatic stress disorder all constituted violations of his constitutional rights throughout the trial. The family's private investigator, Bob Heels, expressed his disappointment, saying it sets a terrible precedent for situations like this. Alfonso Rodriguez Jr. received a new sentence on May 18, 2023, which included a life term without the prospect of release. Even though Drew's kidnapping and death occurred more than 20 years ago, her case is obviously never far from people's thoughts. Her mother, Linda, said that she works hard every day to fulfill the commitments she made to Drew, while her father, Alan, stated that he often listens to the last voicemail she left on his phone. She completed the first one, which was to take her home. She also committed to continuing to do the things she had never wanted to do, such as lobbying legislators, speaking in front of an audience, interacting with media, and going to court hearings. The Drew Shoo-In National Sex Offender Public Registry was established when President George W. Bush signed Drew's law. This is a first-of-its-kind public safety tool that gives the public access to sex offender data throughout the country. In addition to the database, you may report instances of sexual abuse and access instructional materials and frequently asked questions. A little garden was created for her, a scholarship was established in her honor, and a tree sculpture that was inspired by one of Drew's paintings was placed on her grave. Even after all these years, Drew is still very much a part of her community and can be seen everywhere.